Hello everyone, welcome to our panel discussion on what has become an increasingly important topic in our society, and that is responsible gambling. With me today are Richard Henry of Rise Life Management Services. He's the Associate Psychologist and Program Manager, and Camille Blake, Educational Social Worker at the Ministry of Education and Youth. So this next question is for both of you, starting with Camille. What is the experience out there with youth and online gambling?
Okay, so this would also stemming back to COVID. During COVID, most children were not supervised properly. So when they were supposed to be doing online classes, many of them were engaged in online games. And we realized that the online games are a gateway to real hardcore gambling. So when we're going into the school, thank God I've been going to a number of the sessions with the officers from Rice Life. I realized that, for instance, Free Fire, that was a game that many of the students tends to play often. And I realized that they said that if for you to move to another level, you would have to use your credit card. And most times the children know how sneaky to get the credit card from their parents' wallets, because parents have to be working long hours, and when they're sleeping, they just know how to get the cards to move to the next level. So this has been stemming from COVID online. They are trying to use their tablets, not for learning purposes, but also the gateway in being able to do gambling. So that is an increase, and there's a lot of issues, and that leads back to number of problems in the family when parents are wondering why their money are missing. So maybe sometime when we hear parents are coming out and saying that their cards are hacked by someone,
It's really family
could be.
who
We
is at
don't have
fault.
any full confirmation, but it could be that is their children doing online gambling and using their cards to purchase games to move to the next level.
Interesting. Richard, what experiences are youth having with online gaming and
Because
gambling?
we work in the space of gambling prevention and treatment, we know that most gambling in the world takes place online. It doesn't take place in a casino. The online space, though, has become a space that's very difficult to police because you have different laws, and in some jurisdictions there are no laws for people to be involved with gambling activities online. As Camille said, one of the subtle ways that they're luring kids into gambling, and there are now studies being done and some completed of the correlation between gaming and gambling. And so there are some games that introduce kids to subtle prizes like skins. And so you would win a skin, and if you win another level of a skin, it has more value, and then people want to buy the skin, and by the time you look around, you get into this sort of gambling activity because the skin has now become something of value. That's one of the issues that we're concerned about. But there's a sport called esport where youngsters play, and not just youngsters, you play games against each other, video games. But what has become quite prevalent now, and then even in the United States, there are big arenas where there are two people playing a game, could be Free Fire, and then you are allowed to bet on who you think is going to win. That's now happening too in our schools. So there are two kids playing FIFA, and the other kids decide, well, I'm going to bet on Michael. Somebody said, I'll bet on Philip. And that sort of esport betting is taking place. So the online space is a space we are very concerned about. We're trying to go over onto that side with messaging about responsible gambling. We haven't seen yet how to police that space properly, but the best that we can do is go back to some of the same principles of what parents should do in terms of monitoring your kids, monitoring what it is that they're on, being able to take up the tablet or whatever machine it is, and because there are particular programs you can put on it that can tell you, well, it either block the kid from going to play that game, or it will tell you exactly where they have been, what they have been doing. So a simple answer is parents have to get more investigative. Parents have to be more informed to be able to manage that space, because the online space has many different players.
All right, thank you. That's a key message, that monitoring of what your children are doing is going to be key to preventing some of the subtle ways in which online gaming draw them in and suck them in and lead them to gambling. Richard, what risks does underage gambling pose to society?
The risks are varied. Primarily, though, it would be a health risk in terms of the earlier that someone gets into gambling, increases the likelihood they'll take that gambling into adulthood, which further increases the likelihood that you'll develop a gambling related problem, which means that you'll have to seek treatment. Hopefully, we have enough treatment specialists, and also that you won't relapse. You'll be able to actually come out of that gambling issue. And of course, the person with a gambling disorder, it affects the entire family. So there are family issues that come about as a result of someone starting gambling at that age. Apart from that, it will affect the goals of the young person. And that will have its effect on the fact that there are too many young people who will not be able to achieve the goals that they have set. And they would have been young people that are going to come into society, who are going to help the society to develop and to grow, etc. So I think mainly the problems are health-related problems. They're developmental problems as well. And we're not going to move away also from problems of criminality. Because even as adults, and if you take a gambling problem into adulthood, there are issues having to do with fraud. A lot of cases that you see announced on the news, etc., if you go and search far back into it, and we have people who come to us at Rise saying they currently have a case of fraud in the court, etc., and that money they got was money to facilitate their gambling. So it is far-reaching. I think most of all, though, the theory or the idea that the earlier you develop a gambling-related problem, which would usually start as an underage gambler, it's the increased likelihood you're going to take that into adulthood, and it's going to be problematic for the society.
All right, some key points there. The earlier you start, the more likelihood of you taking that into adult life and then developing issues,
yes,
whether it's related to mental health or criminality. As it relates to age, we have said before that gambling is illegal for youth up to 18 years of age. How do you suggest that relevant parties verify the age of youngsters to prevent underage gambling?
Well, I mean, the easiest way is, and well, it's not as easy because we don't have a lot of youngsters who don't have identification at age 16. And so I think all of us need to have some sort of verification of your age through an ID or whatever it is. I think that is one way that we can ensure. But the places that we have where young people can go and gamble, they're not letting in kids who are under the age of 18. I think the difficulty lies in educating our players in the market to develop or get into some training programs that help the vendors that they have to be able to look out for kids who come to purchase tickets for different games. Of course, there are communities where the father or the grandmother knows the vendor, and so when little Johnny goes to purchase, he's assuming that he's coming on behalf of Mass Joe. The problem is that after a while, and Johnny seeing Mass Joe maybe win a couple times, he comes to buy the ticket under the guise of Mass Joe, but Mass Joe has not sent him. And so therein lies one of the problems. We need to ensure that regardless of whether the vendor knows the persons in the community, no youngster under the age of 18 should be able to come and purchase a ticket.
So I see where a robust public education campaign in that regard is really needed to help stem that issue.
Most definitely. And we have suggested to Supreme Ventures that we would do training, and they have shown an interest in it, to their credit, of training their vendors. Not only in the importance of not selling to kids under 18, but what are the ills, what are the consequences for youngsters who develop gambling-related problems as a result of early gambling. And I think a program like that would be great, very beneficial.
So what responsibilities do we as individuals have in the tide to help stem underage gambling?
Just like we talk about responsible gambling and all the players that are important, again, individuals, communities, the gaming industry, and the government all have a role to play in dealing with underage gambling. I think the community has a big role. And this year we are looking to ramp up our community program because what the community goals are, what the community culture is, will determine what can happen in terms of gambling for young people in that community. There are communities where it is okay for young people under the age of 18 to be involved with gambling. There are other communities where gambling is not tolerated. And so the community culture is very important. We're hoping to develop a MOU with the SDC that will give us a greater reach into the community. Right now, we're doing some work with the Ministry of Education and Youth, with the youth sector, to train the youth clubs across the island in underage gambling prevention, to take it back to the youth clubs and speak to other youth about underage gambling and create a greater awareness in the community. But the community is definitely important. The BGLC, as a representative of the government, is doing very important work by supporting RISE to get into this initiative. And of course, the gaming industry players also provide support by adhering to the principles that we have set up already, saying young people are not allowed. Look out for young people and anybody underage and ensure that they can't go into the facility, doing training and that sort of thing. So it has to be an approach of all of us.
Does RISE have any other relationships with any other organizations to help bring about the core message of underage gambling prevention?
Well, certainly. It would be impossible, and RISE knows this, to do it on our own. I think for right now, our greatest relationship is with the Ministry of Education and Youth. And we've had this relationship from inception, and the program was started in 2005. And the Ministry of Education and Youth has allowed us free to access to guidance counselors, teams of discipline, and all the students. They guide us too in terms of when we can do our training sessions. And of course, most importantly, they set them up for us and get the guidance counselors to the point where we're going to have the sessions, etc. That relationship is just absolutely fabulous. And so we thank the Ministry of Education and Youth for that. We have other relationships with some NGOs. We've done some work with, as you may know, CVSS in terms, and they're a social work agency. And so it's a Council for Voluntary Social Services. And they have access to not only adults, they have access to youth. And so they can set us up to go into communities, set up their community meetings, and we can have an afternoon speaking to both adults and adolescents about community-related issues.
You keep repeating that word community. It really is going to be a focal point in any sort of program that we have to educate youngsters against underage gambling.
I can honestly say that for right now, it's the weakest point of our program and the most important piece for us to develop and get it big, because it can provide us with a lot more benefits in terms of creating a culture of responsible gambling within communities. And so how we go about that and the relationships that we develop are going to be key. But we intend this project here, which is just a month in, to redevelop some of the relationships we've had in the past and have much stronger community presence. It will help with greater awareness of responsible gambling and gambling related issues. How we go about it is going to be important. I mean, we can do pond the corner counseling, go into communities, speak to persons. SDC sometimes calls us and says, well, there's a community here that is having a gambling related issue. Can you go down there? That's one off. We actually need more than that, and we need a program that is consistent and that has a particular standard that's going to bear fruit.
Over to you, Camille. How can parents, guardians reach out to the ministry for help?
Well, they don't initially have to reach out to the ministry. That's why we always steer them to go to the guidance council, and the guidance council will provide the support. Is sometimes we at the ministry now, when we do further interviews, when a child is maybe expelled from the institution, we'll get that knowledge that this child was a chronic gambler, and then we try now to link them back to RISE Life to be able to get the support before we reintegrate them back into the school system.
Okay. And Richard, how can individuals reach out to Rise Life for assistance?
Well, we have a toll-free number.
And that is?
1-888-991-4146. There's a regular telephone line. We have telephone lifeline counselors that work almost 24 hours. You can call late, they'll get up and take the information. If you need counseling then, or if you need to set an appointment to come into Rise, that's fine. And of course, we're online. We're on most social media platforms, and we've got requests that via social media as well. And of course, you come to 57 East Street and you can walk in and set an appointment. So we try to be as available as possible.
Thank you, Richard. Richard, our partner from Rise Life Management Services, thank you for joining us. Your insights have been very valuable and interesting. And you too, Camille, thank you so much. From the Ministry of Education and Youth, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for joining us for a third episode of the BGLC podcast, Risky Business, Youth and Gambling. Stay tuned for our final episode.